My fiancé texted, "I gave the venue our new guest list. I uninvited 40 of your friends to make room for my yoga class." Without telling me. I replied, "Interesting choice." Then I called the venue, canceled everything under my name, and got my deposit back. When he arrived for the final menu tasting, he found out there was no wedding left to taste. My name is Natalie Marin. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a fire suppression technician, which means I install and maintain sprinkler systems in commercial buildings. It is not glamorous work, but it pays well. Union rate, side inspection contracts when I can get them, and all in, I clear around $88,000 a year. I'm not flashy with money. I drive an old truck that still runs better than most people's newer cars. I don't care about designer bags or expensive restaurants. My one financial flex is having zero debt and a savings account that would have made my father proud. And my father was not an easy man to impress. My fiancé, Mason, taught yoga. He owned a small studio, rented the space, ran classes, had a loyal group of regulars, and sold online content through his website. He made around $45,000 a year, more when private sessions were good. I respected that. Mason had built something real. He knew how to make people feel seen. He could walk into a room and lower everyone's voice without trying. He was also the kind of man who said journey with complete sincerity, called stressful emails low-frequency energy, and once described a burrito as emotionally chaotic. I found that charming for a surprisingly long time. We had been together 3 years and engaged for 7 months. The wedding was set for mid-September, about 9 weeks away from the conversation that ended everything. The budget was $31,000. I was covering $22,000. His parents contributed $6,000. Mason was covering the remaining $3,000 from his studio income. The venue was booked under my name because I was the one who put down the $7,500 deposit, my credit card, my signature, my name as the primary account holder on the contract. That detail matters. The guest list had been finalized for 2 months, 130 people total, roughly 65 each. My side was family, college friends, union coworkers, my best friends since childhood, and people who had stood by me through chapters Mason only knew as stories. His side was family, college friends, and what he called his studio community, clients and fellow yoga instructors he had grown close to over the years. We had done the seating chart. We had confirmed the head count. We had talked to the caterer. It was done, or I thought it was. Then, on a random Tuesday, while I was on a job site running pipe through a ceiling grid, my phone buzzed. It was Mason. Not a call, not a conversation, just a text. "Hey babe, so I gave the venue a new guest list this morning. I had to make some adjustments. Took off about 40 people from your side to make room for the rest of my yoga community. I know it seems like a lot, but these women have been so supportive of our journey, and it would be wrong not to include them. The venue said the adjusted count is fine. Love you." Folded hands emoji. Sparkles. 40 people. He removed 40 people from my guest list without asking me, without discussing it, without even warning me before he did it. He just called the venue, presented himself as the groom, handed them a new list, and texted me afterward like he had changed the napkin color. I was standing 12 feet in the air when I read it. My apprentice looked up and asked, "You okay?" Apparently I made a sound. I don't remember the sound. I remember the feeling. It was like the floor dropped out from under the relationship, which is a strange sensation to have while already above the floor. I climbed down slowly, walked to my truck, sat behind the wheel, and read the text 4 more times. The 40 people Mason cut included my best friend from childhood, 6 union coworkers I had worked with for over a decade, my entire college friend group, my father's best friend, a man who was basically my uncle, and my cousin, who had already booked an international flight. He replaced them with women from his yoga studio, women I had met maybe 2 or 3 times, women whose last names I didn't know, women who, as far as I could tell, knew Mason mostly as the instructor who taught morning vinyasa and told them their shoulders were carrying grief. I sat there for 10 minutes, staring through the windshield, feeling something inside me go very still. Then I typed 2 words. Interesting choice. That was all. Mason replied almost immediately. A heart emoji. Then, knew you'd get it. And the strange thing was, I did get it, just not the way he thought. I spent my lunch break making calls. Not emotional calls, not dramatic calls. Administrative ones. That somehow felt colder. And much more final. The first call was to the venue. I identified myself as the primary account holder, gave the contract number, confirmed my identity, and asked one simple question. Did someone submit a guest list change this morning? The coordinator checked. Yes. Was that person authorized to make contractual changes? A pause. Typing. Then her tone shifted. Mason had been listed as a secondary contact for day of coordination. That meant seating notes, timeline questions, decor confirmations. Not contractual decisions. Not guest allocation changes. Not major modifications without my approval. The coordinator sounded more uncomfortable the longer she reviewed the file. I asked about cancellation policy. With 9 weeks' notice, 60% of my deposit could be refunded. That meant I would recover $4,500 from the $7,500 I had paid. I would lose $3,000. That is real money. Enough money to make most people hesitate. But all I could picture was standing at an altar while my best friend, my cousin, and half the people who mattered to me sat at home because my fiancé wanted a room full of yoga acquaintances. Process the cancellation, I said. She hesitated. Are you sure? Yes. Immediately? Yes. She processed it. 14 minutes later, the confirmation email landed in my inbox. I stared at it longer than I expected because seeing it in writing made the breakup feel more real than the text had. The second call was the caterer. Same situation. Contract under my name, deposit under my name, cancellation penalty, $1,200, refund, $2,800. Done. Third call, the DJ. Thankfully, it was informal. A friend of a friend. He said, "Damn, I'm sorry," and refunded the $500 hold fee. Decent guy. Fourth call, the florist. $1,800 deposit, $600 penalty, $1,200 returned. Done. One by one, I dismantled the wedding. Not with screaming, not with revenge speeches, just phone calls. Each confirmation email felt like removing another brick from a house I had suddenly realized I did not want to live inside. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, every vendor under my name was canceled. Total lost in penalties, a little over $5,000. Total recovered, around $9,000. Was it painful? Absolutely. Did it still feel better than marrying someone who thought my life could be edited by text message? Yes, without question. I didn't tell Mason. Some people might judge that, but I had no interest in another argument where he explained why his choices were spiritually justified. I went back to work, finished the job, answered emails, checked inspection paperwork, and pretended my engagement had not just ended somewhere between a ceiling grid and a cancellation confirmation. When I got home, Mason was still teaching an evening class. The apartment was quiet. I heated leftover pasta, turned on a show I barely watched, and sat there with a strange, numb calm. Like my body had decided panic was inefficient. The final menu tasting was scheduled for Thursday, 2 days away. He still believed he was walking into a wedding venue. I went to bed knowing there wouldn't be one. That should have made me feel cruel. Instead, I felt clear. Thursday morning, Mason woke up early. He moved around the apartment lightly, almost humming. Big day, he said. He kissed my forehead. Today's going to be beautiful. I looked at him over my coffee. The confidence, the certainty, the complete assumption that everything was still his. Something inside me went cold. He said he needed sunrise meditation to prepare his energy, then left. I sat there for a few minutes after the door closed, listening to the silence he left behind. Then I got dressed for work. At approximately 11:15, my phone rang. Mason. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. Then again. Then again. On the fourth call, I answered. The sound that hit me was chaos. Half crying, half shouting. Traffic noise. Echo. Parking lot acoustics. What did you do? I leaned against my truck. I canceled the vendors. There was a beat of stunned silence. Then, you what? The venue says there is no reservation. Correct. The caterer said the contract was terminated. Also correct. I'm standing in a parking lot right now. I said nothing, because what exactly was there to add? Then his voice changed from panic to fury. You canceled our wedding over a guest list? And that sentence told me everything. Because even then, standing in the wreckage, he still thought this was about a guest list. No, I said, keeping my voice steady. I canceled vendor contracts legally under my name because the person I was planning to marry made a major decision without my knowledge, without my consent, and informed me afterward with emojis. You're being dramatic. There it was. Dramatic. The favorite word of people who create chaos and resent your reaction to it. I'm being dramatic? Yes, you're humiliating me. I looked up at the gray sky above the parking lot. Interesting. Somehow his humiliation mattered. Mine didn't. Mason, I said carefully, you removed 40 people from my life. It was a wedding adjustment. It was my guest list. They're just people you know. That sentence landed harder than the shouting. Just people you know. My best friend since I was 9? Silence. My union co-workers who stood beside me when I earned my certification? Nothing. My father's best friend? Still nothing. My cousin who already booked international travel? He exhaled sharply. Then he said the thing that ended whatever microscopic chance remained. My yoga community is part of my identity. I closed my eyes. Suddenly, the entire relationship rearranged itself in my memory. The moments I had excused. The compromises I had swallowed. The times I told myself he just communicated differently. The quiet hierarchy where his emotional world always seemed to outrank mine. And now here it was, spoken clearly. Your people are optional. Mine are essential. The women in my community support our journey, he snapped. Our journey? Yes. They barely know me. They know enough. That's not the point. No, he said coldly. You just don't understand spiritual community. I almost admired the confidence. To stand in a parking lot with a destroyed wedding and still believe you were morally superior takes a special kind of commitment. Almost. I knew you'd overreact if I asked first. That was it. Intentional. That was control. I think we're done, I said. Silence. Then, don't say that. I'm ending the engagement. No, it wasn't heartbreak or pleading. It was refusal, like my decision required his approval. No, I repeated. You don't get to decide this alone. As of right now, this conversation is over. I'll have your things packed by the weekend. Coordinate pickup with your sister. Are you serious? Yes. You're throwing away 3 years over this? No, I said, taking a breath. I'm ending 3 years because this showed me who I was actually marrying. That shut him up. For about 2 seconds. Then the insults came. Fast. Cruel. Accusations about my ego, my inability to compromise, my emotional rigidity, how transactional I sounded. The irony was almost artistic. He made an unauthorized financial and social decision, and somehow I was transactional. Eventually, he hung up. Not because he was done, but because he realized yelling wasn't working. I stood beside my truck longer than I needed to. My hands were shaking. Not because I doubted myself, but because adrenaline doesn't care whether your decision is right. My apprentice looked at me once, then wisely looked away. I appreciated that. That evening, the second wave arrived. Mason's mother called. She opened without greeting. You have emotionally devastated my son. No, what happened? No, help me understand. Just verdict. Your son removed 40 people from my guest list without asking. He was trying to create something meaningful. It was already finalized. He made adjustments. He erased half my side. You're exaggerating. I actually pulled up the spreadsheet while she talked. 40 names. Highlighted. Very real. Your son replaced my family and friends with yoga clients. They're important to him. My people are important to me. That's selfish. That word made me blink. Selfish. I wanted to ask whether rewriting someone else's wedding counted as generosity, but I stayed calm because anger would only feed the story she clearly preferred. Then she shifted tactics. Regardless, you've now cost this family thousands of dollars. There it was. Money. His parents' $6,000 contribution. Expected reimbursement. Immediate urgency. As if the financial injustice began with me. I explained the vendor cancellations, the penalties, the refunded amounts, exactly where the money had gone. Calmly. Fact by fact. When I finished, she called me cold. Maybe I was. But cold clarity is what happens when emotional manipulation stops working. Before hanging up, she said, "You'll regret this." Maybe. But not as much as marrying into it. I thought the worst part would be ending the engagement. It wasn't. The worst part was discovering how many people had quietly agreed with Mason's behavior. Saturday morning, his sister arrived with a U-Haul trailer. Not Mason. That told me plenty. I had packed everything neatly. Clothes folded, shoes boxed, toiletries separated, even his decorative stones and crystals wrapped carefully in bubble wrap. Because despite everything, I'm not cruel. His sister walked in, looked around, then looked at the boxes. Well, she said, at least you're organized. I try. She crossed her arms. Mason wanted me to tell you something. Of course he did. He says you'll regret this for the rest of your life. I leaned against the counter. Maybe maturity would have looked quieter, but I was tired. So I said, maybe, but at least my best friend will be invited to my next wedding. Her expression didn't change. Not offended, not amused, just tired. Interesting, because tired suggested familiarity. Like maybe this wasn't the first time she had cleaned up one of Mason's emotional disasters. She supervised the loading, 40 minutes, minimal conversation. Then she left the apartment key on the counter. That should have been the end. It wasn't. 3 days later, I got mail. Actual physical mail. Hand-addressed. From Mason's yoga studio. I stood in my kitchen staring at the return address longer than necessary before opening it. Studio letterhead. Lotus watermark. Elegant script font. Already ridiculous. The letter was signed by 8 women from Mason's yoga community, the exact type of people he had wanted at our wedding badly enough to erase my guests. The message was essentially this. I had caused irreparable emotional damage to a man who brought healing and light to others. My inability to appreciate spiritual community revealed the true flaw in the relationship. I should reflect on the energy I was putting into the world. I read it twice, then laughed so hard I had to sit down. Not because heartbreak is funny. Because the absurdity was, 8 strangers, women I had barely exchanged more than polite greetings with, wrote me a collective moral condemnation letter on yoga studio stationery, like some kind of spiritual intervention committee. I put it on my fridge, not out of anger, because it was genuinely the funniest thing I had ever received, and I wanted to look at it while drinking coffee. The next escalation came from his father, and unlike everyone else, that one was harder. His father was decent, retired shop teacher, quiet, measured, the kind of man who built furniture in his garage and fixed things instead of complaining about them. We had always gotten along. When he called, he didn't attack, didn't accuse, didn't dramatize. Natalie, he said gently, I know this is a mess. That sentence alone almost made me lower my guard, because finally someone was speaking like an adult. I don't agree with everything Mason did, he continued, but $6,000 is real money for us. And he was right. That mattered. His father hadn't changed my guest list, he hadn't called me selfish, he hadn't weaponized yoga clients. He had simply written a check because his son was getting married, and now that money was gone. I need a few days, I told him. He agreed. That weekend, I sat at my dining table with every receipt, venue cancellation, caterings, florist, refund confirmations, penalty charges, spreadsheet open, calculator beside me. The numbers were ugly. Total deposits originally paid across vendors, $15,300. Total cancellation penalties, $4,800. Total refunds returned to me, $10,500. His parents' $6,000 had been applied mainly toward catering and florist costs. The refunds from those specific vendors totaled about $4,000. The remaining $2,000 had effectively vanished into cancellation penalties. Legally, I didn't owe anything. Every contract was under my name. Every refund came to my account. Case closed. But legal and fair are not always identical. And his father wasn't Mason. So Sunday morning, I drove to his house. He answered, wearing a flannel shirt with sawdust on the sleeves. Exactly as expected. I handed him a check for $4,000. Not $6,000. I wasn't absorbing the financial damage caused by his son's decision, but I also wasn't keeping money that clearly originated from them. He looked at the check, then at me, then nodded. You're a decent woman, he said quietly. Somehow, that hurt more than all the screaming. Because decent people ending relationships is sad. Chaos ending relationships is exhausting. I'm sorry, I said. And I meant it. He shook my hand. I left. That was the last direct contact I had with anyone in Mason's family. But the real aftermath wasn't finished. Mason had spent weeks building his version of the story, and stories have one dangerous weakness. Eventually, people compare notes. About 10 days after the cancellation, I heard through a mutual friend that Mason had been telling a very clean version of events. In his version, I panicked. I had commitment issues. I destroyed the wedding without warning. I emotionally abandoned him. Convenient. Simple. Victim-friendly. The problem with simplified lies is that they collapse the moment specifics enter the room. And specifics entered fast. Some of the women from his yoga studio started asking questions. Apparently, someone mentioned that real invited guests had been removed. Someone else mentioned family members. Then someone asked the obvious question. Wait, we replaced the bride's actual guests? That was when the emotional wellness narrative became harder to maintain. I didn't tell them. That matters. I didn't contact the studio. Didn't send screenshots. Didn't defend myself. Information spread this way it always does, through conversations, overlapping communities, and awkward clarifications. Then, quietly, consequences appeared. His Tuesday evening class had around 18 regulars, then 11. Thursday dropped 2. Private sessions got canceled. A few recurring clients disappeared. Not everyone left, but enough did to matter. When you run a small studio, 7 lost regulars is not a minor inconvenience. That is monthly income. That is margin pressure. That is stress. And the irony was impossible to miss. The same community he prioritized over my actual relationships became the first community to judge his behavior once they learned what really happened. I'm a technician, not a poet, but even I could appreciate the symmetry. Meanwhile, I did something I had been avoiding. I called the 40 people Mason removed. Every single one. Not to trash him, not to recruit sympathy, just to tell the truth. The wedding was off. I was sorry. And they mattered to me. That last part mattered most, because being cut from a wedding invitation without explanation hurts, especially when flights are involved. My cousin, the one who had already booked international travel, laughed when I told him. Not cruelly, just in disbelief. Then he said, I'm still coming. What? We'll do something. 3 weeks later, he did. A cookout at my best friend's house. 16 people showed up. Union coworkers came straight from work in boots. My cousin brought expensive imported snacks like emotional support gifts. Someone brought folding chairs. Someone brought beer. My best friend brought his ridiculous dog that thinks every human exists to throw tennis balls. No seating chart. No floral arrangements. No scripted vows. No curated spiritual energy. Just people who actually wanted to be there. And somewhere between burned burgers and cheap beer, I realized something that almost embarrassed me. That little backyard gathering felt more honest than the wedding ever had. No performance. No hierarchy. No guest value calculations. No one quietly wondering whether they were important enough to stay on a list. At one point, my cousin pulled me aside. You okay? I looked around before answering. At laughter. At familiar faces. At people Mason had treated like optional background characters. For the first time, I really considered the answer. Yeah, I said, I think I am. And I mostly meant it. Healing isn't cinematic. It's strange. Some mornings you feel strong. Some mornings, a random song in a grocery store makes your chest tighten for no reason. But overall, I was getting there. Then my best friend came over one weekend, saw the yoga letter on my fridge, and read it out loud in the most dramatic, fake spiritual voice imaginable. Reflect on the energy you are introducing into the universe. I laughed so hard my ribs hurt. Can I frame this? He asked. No. Why? Because I earned it. That became a running joke. And weirdly, that joke helped, because humiliation loses power when it becomes absurd. My savings account took a real hit. Over $8,000 when all calculations settled. That is not small money. That is the kind of loss you physically feel when you check your balance. But every time I looked at the number, another thought followed. More expensive than cancellation? A divorce. More expensive than cancellation? A future built with someone who thought consent was optional when his feelings felt important enough. More expensive than cancellation? Years of smaller versions of the exact same fight. Once I saw that, the money stopped feeling like loss. It started feeling like escape. People keep asking if I regret how I handled it. Number. I regret that I ever needed to. Because when a relationship ends over something that sounds ridiculous, people assume the ridiculous thing was the actual problem. It wasn't. By then, I understood this had never been about invitations. If Mason had sat me down and said, "Hey, I really want more people from my studio there. Can we revisit numbers?" That would have been a conversation. Maybe difficult, maybe frustrating, but normal. Instead, he made the decision, executed it, informed me afterward, and expected gratitude for understanding. That is not conflict. That is entitlement. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I started replaying old moments I had dismissed because relationships always involve compromise, right? The restaurant plans that somehow always became his preferred place. Holiday visits that quietly shifted toward his family. Friend gatherings where my schedule bent around his energy. Conversations where disagreement somehow became proof that I wasn't emotionally evolved enough. At the time, each moment felt small, individually harmless. But patterns are dangerous because they hide inside isolated incidents. Then something dramatic happens, and suddenly the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. What happened with the wedding was a compressed preview of what marriage would have looked like. My priorities matter less. My people matter less. My boundaries are negotiable if someone feels justified enough. And the scariest part is this. If he had asked instead of acted, if he had been just slightly more strategic, I might have missed it. That thought still unsettles me. Because disaster does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives smiling, using pet names, sending heart emojis, calling control a misunderstanding. My savings account is rebuilding. Overtime helps. Extra inspection contracts help. Life keeps moving. The apartment is quieter now. Cleaner too, honestly. And I sleep better. That surprised me. I expected grief to be louder. Instead, relief was. Every now and then, I think about that Thursday morning. Mason kissing my forehead. Saying the day would be beautiful. Walking out believing he still owned the future. And I wonder whether he ever understood what actually happened. Not the canceled vendors. Not the money. The real thing. The trust fracture. The moment I realized he did not see partnership the way I did. Maybe he understands now. Maybe he doesn't. Not my problem. That ridiculous letter eventually became an inside joke between me and the people who actually knew me. Eventually, the joke turned into something else. Proof that walking away was correct. Proof that some communities protect truth and some protect narrative. A few months later, I ran into one of Mason's former clients by accident in a grocery store in the frozen food aisle. She recognized me, looked awkward, and finally said, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. We didn't know." That was it. No dramatic confrontation. No closure speech. Just that. And strangely, it was enough. Because accountability does not always need spectacle. Sometimes it is just truth arriving late. So no, I don't regret canceling the wedding. I regret ignoring the smaller warnings that came before it. Here is what I know now. Because if someone can rewrite your guest list without your consent, what happens when the decisions are bigger? Holidays, friendships, children, whose family comes first, whose boundaries matter. The guest list was never the issue. The guest list was the preview. And I watched enough to decide not to buy the full show.